5 years. It's been 5 whole years since the Nintendo Switch first launched. Now, on the one hand, that is such a short period of time in the grand scheme of things, but at the same time, that is a substantial portion of time. I mean, hell, this thing has been around for a quarter of my life, and when you put it like that, well, damn. The Wii U didn't even make it that long. Nintendo keeps reiterating that the Switch is somewhere in the middle of its lifespan at the moment, though they've been saying that for what feels like, and at this point actually might have been, years. It's hard to know what's next, and that's something I may end up doing a whole video about, but for now, let's take a look back on the last 5 years of the Nintendo Switch. I think the time leading up to and including the launch of the Switch will always hold a place as one of my most special memories. I was at that right age where I had very little else to actually worry about, but was just old enough to be really passionate about video games, so being along for the hype train was exhilarating because I was full in. I remember having seen the 2014 Game Awards footage of what at the time was simply known as Zelda U. My mind was absolutely blown by what I had seen, and as a very fresh and excitable Zelda fan, I started saving up for a Wii U immediately. Summer of 2015 I got one, and Zelda U kept getting delayed, while the Wii U was digging a deeper and deeper grave for itself. Around this time is also when rumors of the NX started cropping up, and I spent all of my time keeping up to date on any fraction of news I could find. Patent filings, rumors, leaked images, concept art. If it was rumored about, I heard it. NX hype was my life. October 2016 came around and Nintendo finally unveiled the Nintendo Switch. And I was blown away. The hybrid rumors were true and Zelda was looking incredible on the system, and my little mind was beyond excited. A few months later, the 2017 Switch presentation happened, and to this day I still think it's one of the very best Nintendo presentations ever. Mario, Zelda, Xenoblade, Splatoon, and more were all revealed to be coming to the system that year, making for one of, if not the, strongest launch years for any system ever. All of these games ended up being fantastic, and there was a wide enough spread of games to satisfy most fans. Nintendo also took the opportunity to drop one of the single greatest pieces of cinema the world has ever seen. The Breath of the Wild release date trailer. I could probably do a whole video on this trailer, but suffice to say, I legitimately think it is one of the most expertly crafted trailers I have ever seen. Watching that trailer, I was genuinely weeping in my bed because I was so excited, and when I saw that March 3rd release date, I screamed. Which, looking back, is a little bit embarrassing, but it was, I don't know, an emotional time in my life. It felt good. That 3-month period up to launch single-handedly became the most exciting period of my life thus far, and looking back, it's really embarrassing to say that out loud, but it was awesome. I'm a little afraid that I'll never feel so strongly about anything in the future. Like, what if I get married and I'm at the altar thinking, well geez, this isn't as exciting as Zelda back in 2017. Anyway, I snagged one of the last 3 pre-orders in my city for the console, and obviously the game, and then began the most painful wait of my life. But launch day did come, and I fondly remember pouring dozens and dozens and dozens of hours into the game in the first few weeks. I think I hit the 100-hour mark before the end of March, which astonishes me today because now I can hardly finish a 15-hour game in the course of a month. I remember being so entirely floored by the quality of the game and the freedom it offered. The scale and scope were unlike anything I'd played at the time. But what was really unbelievable was that I was playing it on a portable device. I think the longer the Switch has been around, the less the technical accomplishment is appreciated. And certainly the hardware is showing its age, and the competition is only looking better and better, especially with the Steam Deck starting to ship out. But it is still pretty remarkable what they can make work on a mobile chipset powered by a battery, especially at a $300 price point with such a small form factor. Obviously, launch year ended up being a really phenomenal year for the Switch, and it still remains my favorite. Breath of the Wild and Mario Odyssey were so refined and so fun. Splatoon and Mario Kart were terrific multiplayer games to fill up my summer, and Xenoblade 2 was another massive release to cap off the calendar year, and a game I thoroughly enjoyed. I also got the chance to play games like Stardew Valley and Rocket League for the first time, and honestly, Switch is still my favorite place to play them. And that year's E3 was really memorable and promised a lot of exciting projects to come in the future, and really felt like Nintendo was turning around after the failure of the Wii U. Switch was the only console I've ever gotten on launch day, and I don't think I really appreciated how incredible the software lineup was for a launch year. Especially with the recent context of the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series launch years, which were by no means bad, but it's just really incredible that 2017 had so many high-caliber releases. It would be hard to top such a great year, so they didn't even try for 2018. In the first half of the year, off the top of my head, I can really only remember the release of Kirby Star Allies, which was just fine. That, and the February direct announcement of Smash Ultimate, which absolutely defined 2018 for most Switch owners. It was awesome to have the game announced, hyped, and released within the same year, with DLC spanning the next few years to keep the conversation going. The Splatoon 2 DLC also dropped that summer, and I know it was well received, but I don't really see anyone talk about it much, which is a little sad because I think it was fantastic. Dark Souls also came to the Switch, which is a pretty major release purely for the fact that a Dark Souls game was on a Nintendo platform. 2018, however, also saw the release of Nintendo Switch Online, which has been unable to escape controversy ever since. In the beginning, NSO signified the death of the Virtual Console, a digital storefront where customers could purchase legacy retro content and download it to their systems. Now, legacy content would be available in a limited selection exclusively as a part of the online subscription service. The lineup of NES games initially was slim, which was really frustrating. As time went on, more and more games were added, and SNES games were included, but the amount of content available still pales in comparison to what has been historically available on the Virtual Console. The actual online performance saw no improvement as we started paying for it, and arguably it's worse across the board than it ever was on Wii U or 3DS. One of the major sells for me, at least, was cloud saves, though even this proved too much for Nintendo. Most games support the cloud saves, and they work pretty well. Not quite as seamlessly as the Steam or Xbox solutions, but I've had no real issues. The problem is that some games simply don't support cloud saves. At all. No mainline Pokemon game offers support, Animal Crossing requires an entirely separate application to transfer data, and some other games like Splatoon or Dark Souls forgo the feature entirely to prevent save file manipulation or something, but no other platform has this issue, and it's incredibly obnoxious. Especially for me, who completely forgot about these exceptions and lost tons of rare Pokemon in my entire Animal Crossing town when I transferred to my OLED. But on the bright side, the service is notably cheaper than the Xbox or PlayStation equivalents, so I don't know, silver lining or something. 2019 was a pretty solid year for the console, seeing the release of games like Link's Awakening, Luigi's Mansion 3, Fire Emblem Three Houses, and Pokemon Sword and Shield, which I actually enjoyed despite the controversies. Mario Maker 2 also dropped and flopped this year. I think the game sold fairly well, but the conversation around the game died almost immediately, and the game never had the same excitement around it that the original did on Wii U. The post-launch content updates did add some cool things, but nothing that could really revive the game, and amiibo costumes didn't return, so bad game. I know a lot of people have gotten really into it and there's great content to play, but for me, it definitely goes down as one of the most underwhelming releases in recent memory. Speaking of underwhelming, this year is also when Switch Pro rumors really began to make it to the mainstream. Instead of a Pro, though rather predictably I think, we got the Switch Lite, a cheaper, handheld-only version of the Switch that dropped the same day as the Link's Awakening remake. The new SKU was exciting, and the games this year were fun, but I think a lot of users were over the honeymoon period and started getting really frustrated with the lack of new features the system was receiving. Though, I'll talk about that more towards the end, seeing as the situation hasn't really changed much. 2019 was also a big year for Joy-Con drift, as significantly more people were now experiencing it. This, too, remains unsolved. Personally, I've had 2 sets of Joy-Con start drifting, and it's really frustrating how much of a hassle it can be to fix them. In other unfortunate news, January of 2019 saw an odd video quietly dropped on Nintendo's YouTube announcing the restart of development for Metroid Prime 4. While the news in the video was sad to hear, it was also really refreshing to hear Nintendo actually communicate about one of their projects in an open manner. Unfortunately, this has not become the trend with the rest of their business, especially in the following year. After COVID hit, Nintendo was almost radio silent all year except for a few occasions. Before COVID, however, 2020 started off in the funniest way it possibly could have. Another Fire Emblem character being announced as the final character for Smash. And Twitter went absolutely feral. Of course, at the end of the presentation, they did announce that they would do a second wave of DLC fighters, but the initial outrage was still thrilling to watch. Then, of course, March happened. But it wasn't all bad because the recent Animal Crossing delay meant that the game came out right as COVID hit, and the timing could not have been better for fans, or for Nintendo really. The game absolutely blew up, and I spent a lot of time engrossed in the game. While a lot of people are critical about the missing content from previous games, I still think the game does enough new stuff to place it as my favorite entry in the series. However, I will totally admit that the content release schedule for this game was completely botched, and Nintendo really dropped the ball on supporting the game. Though, again, there's a lot to say here, so I'll save it for another time. Xenoblade Chronicles got a really exciting remaster in May, and then things were quiet for a while. Nintendo wasn't doing directs, news was spread thin, and things were kind of bleak. A lot of games were being randomly announced on Twitter, and for a minute, we were scared that directs were just done. Forever. However, a Mario 35th Anniversary Direct in the fall announced some exciting, and some controversial, new releases. Mario 3D All-Stars was announced as a limited time offer, and while it's nice to have all these games together on Switch, the lack of any exciting new content or features makes it really forgettable. Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity and Pikmin 3 Deluxe were also fantastic releases that year, with Hyrule Warriors finally delivering on the Musou crossover promise, creating a game that still felt entirely like its source material, but with a completely different gameplay system. Almost returning to normalcy, 2021 was, in my opinion, the second strongest year for Switch. Monster Hunter Rise, 3D World, Monster Hunter Stories 2, Skyward Sword HD, the Ace Attorney Chronicle Collection, and many others made it a really well-paced and broadly enjoyed year. The most notable release, however, was that of Metroid Dread. Even for non-Metroid fans, the fact that Nintendo revived a game that was started 20 years ago was monumental, proving that nothing really stays dead forever. Shin Megami Tensei 5 dropped this year after a long wait since its initial reveal in January of 2017. The Switch OLED was also a highlight of the year. While initially being disappointing for most people who were expecting a Pro model, I've actually really enjoyed mine, though I still think we desperately need a Pro model. Nintendo's own games are struggling to hit a solid 30 FPS these days, and games on other platforms are looking nicer and nicer, which makes the Switch offerings look worse and worse. Over the last 5 years, the way I've interacted with my Switch has changed pretty significantly. At launch, I spent a lot of time in both modes, marveling at the possibilities of what I could now take on the go, while still loving to kick back and throw my games on a big TV and relax. Later, I found myself primarily playing on my TV, and now I spend most of my time in handheld where, especially on the OLED, the games usually look great. But I rarely play anything on a TV anymore because the games just aren't holding up. Not that the games are actually getting worse, but the hardware is just aging very quickly in the face of other options on the market, and the quality difference between my different platforms becomes increasingly evident on a bigger screen. Something interesting that I've noticed is that I've spent significantly more time using my Switch than any other platform I've ever had, probably combined. And while there's a combination of things that contribute to that, I think it is obviously due to the hybrid nature of the system. Being so easy to pick up and play for a little while I've got spare time, or to take traveling, and still being able to play the same games when I've got a night in, makes it really easy to rack up a ton of hours in a way dedicated handhelds or dedicated consoles just can't provide. It also helps that my favorite Switch games are games that I could pour obscene amounts of hours into. Games like Breath of the Wild, Splatoon, Animal Crossing, Smash, Monster Hunter, etc. There are tons of games I could play endlessly if I had to. And again, due to the hybrid nature, I find it a lot easier to get through these massive games, whereas on a PC or my PlayStation, I prefer shorter, more linear experiences that I can just get through and be done with. 2022 is still young, but is poised to be a massive year for the Switch. Starting off strong with Pokemon Legends Arceus, which I've recently talked about, go check that out. And with massive games like Breath of the Wild 2, Bayonetta 3, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, this year is set up to be 2017 Part 2. I don't want to spend too much time discussing what the future looks like, but 22 is definitely going to be a massive chapter in the Switch's history. Now that we're all caught up, I just want to spend a little bit of time talking about some miscellaneous things that I have found really interesting, including some other really notable games on the Switch, like Skyrim, a ton of Doom games, GTA, Bioshock and Borderlands, and a ton of other third-party support that the Wii U never would have seen. While these are really never the best versions of the games, it's really cool that Switch owners have all of these options and that the Switch library is thriving, and could totally be viable as somebody's only platform. It's also really cool for me to look at the ports and appreciate them from a technical level. I'm really interested in the technical side of computer graphics and scaling games to fit different hardware, so it's always really cool to see how well or poorly games are ported. Doom and The Witcher 3 are astonishing achievements, while Ark and The Outer Worlds are actually pitiful. Unfortunately, however, the Switch experience is not just good games and fun memories. As I mentioned earlier, the system's software has unfortunately remained largely the same since launch. Some of the most highly requested features like themes or a web browser are still nowhere to be seen. And while I'm so down for themes, who genuinely wants a web browser on their Switch? Like, is anyone aside from kids who got banned from the family computer using web browsers on their consoles? Who's asking for that? I'm confused. Little note in here, I've had to tweak this section of the script because for 5 years, fans have been asking for folders. And I wrote a section about how if they were neglecting such a simple feature that they've included on previous systems, if they wanted to, they would have by now. But as of March 21st, a system update was released that adds exactly that. Moral of the story is that it's never too late for your mundane dreams to be fulfilled. Nintendo has also completely abandoned the user icons, with the last new ones having been added something like 2 years ago. Another small tweak here, icons are back as a customizable My Nintendo reward system, and they're actually super cool and rotate weekly, and it's kind of a big deal. I also don't think they're making new news channels for their games anymore. Granted, I don't think a lot of people actually use the news channel, but it's indicative that they're probably not super invested in going much further with system level stuff, which I think is a shame. The most glaring omissions, in my opinion, have been the lack of a dedicated activity log and new themes. At this point, I don't know if I see an activity log happening. If they dropped folders 5 years in, I guess nothing is really off the table. It's just frustrating that the information is being tracked, we just can't see any of it beyond rough estimates on the user profile. The system knows exactly how long you've played each game, but for some reason there is no way to see all of that information laid out or compared with other games, which is especially baffling considering the Wii U and 3DS both had really elaborate activity log apps. Even the Wii offered more specific data given through the messages every day. The lack of themes has also been incredibly confusing given that the infrastructure is already there. There is a dedicated themes option in the settings, and it currently only holds 2 options. I know at launch they said they didn't want to include elaborate themes so as not to clutter down the system and keep menus as snappy as possible, but they haven't even added different colors or static images or a pure black theme for the OLED. The system seems like it was supposed to support more options, but after 5 years, there just aren't many at all. Also, somewhat disappointing has been the content drip feed approach for most of the B-Team titles, especially the Mario sports games. They just get released with relatively little content and get filled out more over the course of a year or so with little content patches. And it just leaves a bad taste in my mouth because the game is clearly unfinished at launch, and then by the time the game is done, it still doesn't feel like a massively different experience, and even if the game has enough content by the end to feel like a justified purchase, it just isn't attractive. It seems lazy. They're patching in the holes after releasing rather than using free updates to sustain a healthy community. I just want them to stop. But back to the Switch itself, I've been thinking a lot about the broader scope and the success it's seen at large, because it really is a wonderful time to be a Nintendo fan. While there are definitely some persistent and annoying problems at the moment, a lot of IPs that have been considered dead or dormant are getting great revivals. Almost anything feels possible at this point. Smash DLC has broken almost every barrier we thought there was, and long-running series are being completely refreshed and reinvented. It almost feels like a renaissance of sorts, especially after the Wii U era. And while this comes down to personal taste, I think the Switch is home to a lot of the best games of their respective series. Mario Odyssey, Breath of the Wild, Metroid Dread, and Smash Ultimate, among many others, feel like the ultimate culmination of years and years of games. For all the gripes we may have, it's a really great time for games. Indies are also thriving on the platform, and overall, the variety of different experiences available is really healthy. In terms of sales, it's been an astounding success, even surpassing the Wii. That being said, I don't think the Switch has had nearly the same cultural impact as the Wii did. And maybe it's just because I'm older now and not everyone I interact with is excited to go home and play Wii Sports anymore, but despite more Switches being out in the wild, I feel like I rarely, if ever, hear about it in the mainstream or outside of Nintendo communities. The same goes for Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, which has sold something like 42 million copies, which is absolutely fucking insane. Realistically, what's happening here is that the Switch is tapping into more of the hardcore market that is already involved in the gaming conversation, whereas the Wii majoritively reached into a casual market that was not in any way involved. So the user base spanned a broader scope of people, making it seem wider reaching and more culturally impactful. One interesting development over the course of the Switch's life has been Nintendo's usage of paid DLC packs for their games. Games on the Wii U and 3DS definitely had paid DLC, but it wasn't as common or as good as it is now. Smash got 11 really intricately and lovingly designed fighters, Mario Kart is getting 48 new tracks, and Animal Crossing got a Happy Home Designer expansion rather than as a separate game, which I think is brilliant. Pokemon even got DLC, and Fire Emblem finally figured out how to reasonably price DLC after that ridiculously expensive content on the 3DS. Even Breath of the Wild, an exclusively single-player game, got a DLC expansion, even if it was largely forgettable. DLC is kind of a touchy subject, and I know a lot of people have really strong negative feelings about it, but I've just accepted it as a permanent reality, and very rarely do I feel like Nintendo launches games in an incomplete state so that they can charge for the rest of it later. And when they do launch games in an incomplete state, the rest of the content is usually free as per the Mario sports games I mentioned. I'm now at the point where DLC announcements are usually pretty exciting for me. It's really not hard to convince me to spend more time in the games I already love. So far, I've been talking a lot about games, so let's talk about the hardware itself and its accessories. The Switch itself is pretty well designed, and As the years go on, it's quickly showing that it will likely have the shortest physical lifespan of any Nintendo console. Nintendo used to be super well known for their durable tech that could survive nearly anything, but now, well, original Switch models have been cracking the plastic case, Joy-Cons are failing left and right, and the quality of the products just doesn't seem up to people's expectations. The Pro Controller is certainly an exception though, and is one of my all-time favorite controllers, though I have heard a couple people complain about durability issues. One hardware feature I've been let down by is HD Rumble. The original January presentation from 2017 had me so intrigued by the immersive possibilities of enhanced haptic feedback, but very few games have ended up using it to great effect. Years later, Mario Odyssey is probably still the best implementation of the feature, though Metroid Dread is a recent standout game for it. I hope that in the next few years we get a few more killer apps for HD Rumble, but at this point, I'm really just waiting for the next iteration of the tech. The PS5 haptics are a lot more advanced than the Joy-Con have, and seeing what that can do for a game has me really hopeful that Nintendo takes the idea further in the next hardware iteration rather than dropping it altogether.
I'll get you, Mario. No way! I'm not gonna win! Ha! 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 Oh. Hello, everyone. I'm Bill Trinan from Nintendo's Treehouse. Looks like you caught me playing with my toys.
Somewhat adjacent to hardware is Amiibo, which really blew up in the Wii U era and haven't had a whole lot of interesting support since. Having official, affordable, but still high-quality figures of Nintendo characters is itself enough for me, but as a Toys to Life product, I always felt they were a little lackluster, and never really had a killer app that justified their existence. Yet, I vastly prefer this approach to having one exclusive game for them to be used in and then never again. These days, Amiibo support in any given game is typically limited to spawning in some support items and maybe a costume if you're lucky. But it is cool that they can be used across dozens and dozens of different games. I've already aired my grievances with Mario Maker 2, but not having Amiibo costumes return is still the greatest flaw of that game, and yes, I'm still bitter. Outside of software though, Amiibo have been in a weird place lately. They're obviously not as massive a focus for Nintendo anymore, but occasionally we still get some unexpected figures. Mario 3D World launched with cat suit-themed amiibos, Metroid Dread had some cool ones, and even Skyward Sword HD of all things got one, which looks fantastic, but don't get me started on how they locked fast travel to the fucking amiibo. Back in 2018, Dark Souls had an amiibo, which is so cool conceptually, but why Dark Souls? Who made that happen? As new amiibo become less and less frequent, I get the feeling that when the Smash line is finished, we might see the end of them altogether. Speaking of, these Smash amiibo have taken a shockingly long time to release, and I have no clue as to why. Whether or not Nintendo is keen on killing off amiibo, Miis are absolutely on their last legs, and I think that's unfortunate. Maybe Nintendo wants to distance themselves from Wii and Wii U era branding, but gradually erasing Miis is such a weird way to do it. The Mii Maker has been sentenced to hide within the system menu and has no personality or music or anything anymore. Occasionally a game that uses Miis will come along, like Smash or Mario Golf, but their functionality is super limited now. Even Switch Sports, a sequel to the biggest Mii game ever made, is being marketed without them. They've been replaced by more detailed and more varied avatars, but I think they look really generic. Miis are still usable in the game, thank God, but they're largely being excluded from the marketing, and Nintendo doesn't seem to want to draw our attention to them. There is one major wrinkle in all of this, however, and that is Miitopia. For some reason, Grezzo was tasked with remastering the 3DS Mii RPG for Switch. Every character in the game is a Mii, and the additional Mii editor in the game is unbelievably robust. Just give us Tomodachi Life 2 before the Miis die forever. Please. at this point I'm hardly talking about the Switch anymore, so it's probably best to wrap up. I have really loved my time with the Switch so far, and as trivial as it might seem, it genuinely has changed my life, and I don't know what I'd be doing with myself without it. A lot of my passions and hobbies are directly related, and the games I've played here have inspired me in a lot of my creative endeavors, including starting this channel. While I think there is a lot Nintendo has fumbled, I think the library of games and the simple pleasure of playing on the system is really great. So many franchises are represented on the Switch, and it has revived a lot of previously dead games and series while breathing new life into others. I also think that very few of Nintendo's major releases have been flat-out misses, and they are largely really great entries in fan-favorite series. I think it's an incredibly good time to be a Nintendo fan, and I'm really excited to see where the future goes. It's definitely a better time to be a fan than during the Wii U era. So, cheers to a fantastic 5 years. Happy birthday, little guy. If you've stuck through to the end, I just wanted to say a quick thank you to everyone for supporting the channel. I know this video is more than a little late for the 5th anniversary, but I hope you've enjoyed it nonetheless. I've got a couple of other videos prepped for the 5th anniversary as well, including a deep dive into Breath of the Wild, so I hope you look forward to those as well. Cheers everyone, and thanks again.